And we're live. This is Deacon Joseph Swaden, Orthodox Apologetics Live. We're doing Calling All Papal Apologists Day 4. I did talk to Father Enoch about an hour ago. He had to go to church. He may be a little late, but we're here. We're on here to answer some questions or take a look at what we've got. So I'm just going to quickly say good evening all in the chat. And let's see here. Okay. One of the things that, we'll, of course, as always, until we get a Roman Catholic apologist on this show, the theme will remain calling all papal apologists. We're now in day 4. For anyone wondering, that means if you're willing to come on the show and you're willing to defend the papacy, we will have you on. Totally waiting for that. We've had occasional, inbox chats with mostly people who are Orthodox, one Hebrew Israelite. But every time we try to reach out to the papacy type people, it's always a brick wall. And what I mean by a brick wall, just today, someone wrote in the Protestant chat where, I haven't put in a link to that there. Let's just quickly do that. And so the last guy actually just said something to the effect of me, no, we are all one church. And I've been hammering this out now for quite a while. And unfortunately, it seems that the only answer people can give in public is we're one church, which is kind of embarrassing because I was Roman Catholic for the earliest part of my life, for the first 21 years or so. And I didn't do that. I find it amazing that people are just like, we're just one church. I mean, I did for a little while because that's what it said in the books, but it made no sense to me after a while. If you're one church, you believe the same things. They don't believe the same things that we do. They don't do things the same way we do. We don't have the same hierarchies. There's literally nothing that makes us the same. We don't have the same doctrine. So how can you say we're all just one church? It's a cop-out. It's an ecumenical cop-out, and it's done because, frankly, they know that if they hold that position, it allows them to validate their existence. If you say there is only one church, you have to prove which one's false, the Roman Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church. They don't want us to go into the history and the details. They don't want us to go into Hildebrand. They don't want us to go into the deviation of doctrine and the change of positions. So, what's it called? That's why I keep on calling papal apologists. Hey there, James, I believe it is. The Catholic traditionalist guy argued with Matt's like, invitation's still open. I'd be glad to send you a chat link if you want to debate the papacy or anything, or orthodoxy or anything like that, because we'd like you to join the church too. I think it would be a great thing. So if you want, what I can do is I can send you, are you on the, James, are you on the Orthodox Apologetics War Room Warzone? Because if you are, I can send a link directly in there. Or if you wanted to, let me see if there's a way to send private messages in the YouTube. Let's see. Hold on. Trying to figure this out right now. Okay. There used to be a way to message people in YouTube. Does that still exist? Because if not, what I will have to do is try to get an email or something. Unless you want to, mention your Facebook thing. Let's just take a look here. Okay, there's got to be a way to do this, James, where you can, I can send you you know what? Here, there's not too many of us here now. I will just put the Hangouts link right here. Why not? Give me a second. Let's just get the Hangouts link. Hope I don't get in trouble when Father Enoch gets here. Hold on. You guys best not misbehave with this. Start calling up and pranking me. All right, hold on. All right. So let's quickly send this out to you there, James, and to everyone actually, technically, who's there. This is a bad idea. This is a Facebook link. I'm not doing this. Hold on. Give me a second. I'm going to literally copy this. All right. Well, I mean, I'm sure that the people who are watching are, wonderfully trustworthy. Why is it doing that? Give me a second. Trying to copy the physical text, and it will not let me do that. And I don't want to have to. Okay, let's see here. Hold on a second. I'm going to open up my feather pad. I can drag it from there. No, I can't. All right, give me a second. I will get it from inside the Hangout, and then I will put it in here. Okay. All right, and now let's go back to the YouTube page. Okay. There, got it. All right. So, I did, Gregory, but I was copying it out of Facebook. And so what happened was it kept on producing this giant Facebook link. And so that's not going to work. And so obviously I can't have that. So let's see here. So all you have to do there, James, is just click right into that link. And you can just join. Me. Father Enoch's not here yet, but I'm sure he'll be here in a few. He was down at church, and we'll see what happens. Okay, let's make sure that I do that. And then Senya says yes. Thank you very much. Glad you're on it because it didn't work for me when I tried to copy it out of Facebook. Hello.
Okay, can I be heard? Am I coming in loud and clear?
Oh, very, absolutely. You're very loud.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm no apologist or anything. Even though I debated Matt Slick.
Hold on. Is there any chance you could lower it just a tiny little bit, just because it's really loud in my ears?
Let me get further away then. How's this? Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Okay. Okay, great. We hear you. Heard you.
But that question you had asked me about the whether any of the early church fathers spoke about the Old Testament saints after they had risen out of their graves, it got me curious, about whether they were baptized or not. So I looked it up, and I didn't see anything specifically them saying that they had gotten water baptized, but I did notice that some of them were making comparisons between them rising out of their graves and Jesus raising Lazarus back to life.
Oh yeah, no, there's definitely a parallel there. I'm not going to deny that.
So I was curious, do you believe that Lazarus and his family were, is it reasonable to assume that Lazarus and his family had gotten baptized into the new covenant?
I would assume so. Yeah, if I remember correctly, I believe they have, but I wasn't talking about them. I wouldn't draw a parallel to the point where we're saying, okay, well, Lazarus and his family did this, because the graves opened at the time of the crucifixion. Now, I'm not, again, my biggest issue was not, I wasn't trying to do a gotcha moment. I'm anti-gotcha moment. I believe that the truth shows itself without gotcha moments, which is why I think Matt is so confused by our discussions a lot of the time. The point is, I have no gotcha moments. But my biggest thing is that if you claim to defend the fathers of the church, you have to defend the fathers of the church with the fathers of the church. You have to use their words, and we can't theorize on that. Ironically, I think that Matt Slick is probably more in favor of baptism by water than other Protestants. He even said that. But the point is, I can understand. It just seems to me an academic question. But in any case, did you just want to talk about baptism? Because, I believe that baptism necessitates water. That's what baptizing means. It's immerse.
Yeah, but with regards to the whole church father thing, I was trying to stay away from that because the debate with Matt Slick was supposed to be Bible-based, because right. Matt Slick, he doesn't even really believe in whatever the early church fathers have said.
Oh, no, absolutely.
But he does believe in Bible, in the scriptures. So I tried to mainly focus on the scriptures. So that's why I said, with regards to the Old Testament saints having to be baptized before getting into heaven, I said that based on scriptures. In the debate, I specifically spoke about Acts 2:38 and Acts 22:16 and so forth. And I focused on the scriptures to say the scriptures claim that in order to get into heaven, you gotta get baptized.
Well,
so I wanted to.
one of the things that you have to realize is that Matt is nuancing this very carefully, and you may not realize it, because what he's doing is he's saying Christ is sprinkled. And that, even though we see that in some 16th century pictures and stuff like that, we know that Christ was immersed. So right there, you have to look at what he wrote on that thing. Because if you look on his essay on that, he even admits he cannot prove that Christ was sprinkled. But the point is, he's already trying to create deviant versions of baptism. If you want to argue the true archetype for baptism, it has to be our Lord.
Well, he said that, yeah, but I've heard his argument, Maslick's argument with regards to that. And
it's awful.
Oh, you've heard it also? Okay.
I read it on his website, and it's all theoretical stuff. He tries to argue that maybe the priests were sprinkled. He tries to say who would wash someone at the door. Most baptismal fonts are literally at the door of churches. I think it's not a very good argument unless you divorce it from anything real. It was an interesting thing. I'm going to have my obvious disagreements. I personally am not a fan of this whole, the whole scholastic philosophy that just creeps its way throughout all of these discussions when I'm dealing with Matt Slick, because he just kind of forgets the power of God. And I think that that's mainly my biggest pet peeve with a lot of heterodox apologists, is that the power of God is largely forgotten. But
well, yeah, the problem with Matt Slick, even though he claims that he's different from other Protestants and that he accepts water baptism, he doesn't really accept the necessity of water baptism, because he doesn't believe there's any grace associated with it with regards to salvation.
He was saying there's no such thing as an infused grace. And Orthodox don't have this concept of grace being mechanical. And this is one of those things that we had a long discussion on when it came to the Eucharist and a bunch of other things. I'm not saying I agree with Metzlick. I think that he is a heterodox Protestant who in many ways is absolutely wrong. I tell them that every time I call. And I'm just here to answer questions. And I want to do the same for you, which is why I'm going to ask you, because you mentioned you were a traditional Catholic, not a Roman Catholic, a regular Roman Catholic.
Correct.
What did you mean by that? Who are you with?
Have you ever heard of Brother Diamond of VaticanCatholic.com, Brothers Michael and Peter Diamond?
I have. I actually called them on the phone about 10 years ago. Very nervous fellow. I think it was Brother Michael I spoke to. But kind of like a kind of OCD, but interesting individual. But he doesn't have. I didn't see any really good arguments. I know he actually inadvertently might have started this channel when he tried to accuse the Orthodox practice of hesychasm. He compared it to Buddhism. And I think everyone who watched that felt this sick feeling in their stomach, because it's just almost satanic to do that. To say that Gregory Palamas and the introduction of the prayer of Jesus, something that's been used in the West and East for centuries, and then put up Buddhist yogis. I mean, that's disgusting. That's like, say, that's evil.
I didn't see that video. Hesychasm, you said?
Well, yeah, if you look up his Eastern Orthodoxy video, he'll start by quoting Barlam and basically taking Barlam's side, but then he'll start putting in pictures of yogis and saying that that they're trying to do this. It's evil. We're praying to Jesus Christ, and he's comparing that to yogis. And he's talking about repetitions in a church that supposedly says the rosary. I mean, it's insane. It's just something it's horrifying. But if that's the best that they have against Eastern Orthodoxy, not you, but them, against Eastern Orthodoxy, then I got nothing to worry about.
Oh, well, the thing is, I don't really know anything about Eastern Orthodox. I've heard someone, what's his name? He's on YouTube. He's the Catholic Fusionist, and I think he mentioned something about the Filioque or something like that. And I'm not really familiar with all that stuff.
So I'm glad to help. Basically, the Filioque is basically a teaching that was introduced in the 9th century. They claim it was in the 5th century, but we're finding that most of those documents, like in Seville, were forged. It's a 9th century document that teaches from the Father and the Son, as opposed to from the Father. Now, if you look in John 15:26, it says from the Father, but the Church has always said from the Father in the Creed, and then they began to insert it in the 700s. Would be the earliest date in certain Frankish areas in Germany. And what ended up happening was there became a debate over whether the Filioque should be used, and the condemnation of St. Photius would be used as the Filioque was used as a pretext when he was elected after Ignatius was deposed. So the point is then eventually Pope Nicholas was, his position was condemned. What you call the 869 Council was eventually condemned in a council in 879. Pope Leo III put up silver plates over St. Peter's with the creed without the Filioque. And it was pretty much a non-issue. It kept growing in a couple of small places where it shouldn't have been, and it was canonically condemned. And then after Hildebrand rose to power, he imposed the Filioque throughout the West.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I don't know all about that stuff, but
we'd love to help you.
To me, the Orthodox and Catholics, I guess besides that, it seems to me and besides the sprinkling, immersing or whatever stuff, I guess we pretty much agree in most things. I don't know what else we would disagree on.
Oh boy.
Is there anything else?
Oh boy. Well, the first thing I mentioned, Hildebrand, or Gregory VII, as you would know him, he was a pope who existed for about 2 years, and he introduced something called the Dictatus Papae. The Dictatus Papae, which was written in 1075, I'll put up a link here so you can take a look, is basically the origin of all of these massive papal ideas. Wait, is someone else in the chat? Father, is that you?
Hold on just a second.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, I thought I heard the dogs. That's why. Okay. I guess we're just waiting for him. Maybe that was his dogs. I don't know. We had something else to do. We'll just wait for a second. But yeah, these are all great. But I start with papal supremacy because that was where everything has its origin. Created grace comes from Thomism, which comes from the new system that was created. Essence and energies is something that existed in the West and was abandoned. Purgatory was built upon again in the Scholastic period. Imputed guilt. All this stuff finds its origins in the Scholastic period, which was ultimately created by the papal system created by Hildebrand. As a matter of fact, Anselm of Lucca, who's constantly quoted, was originally one of Hildebrand's agents to debate the Greeks. So that's.
You said purgatory. How do you know that Abraham's bosom, Sheol, also called Sheol? How do you know that's not purgatory? That's a third place.
That's theory, and that's not what the fathers teach. What the fathers teach is that, like the angels and demons fought over the soul of Moses' body, that they fight over our spirits at the point of death, and we will either be taken to a foretaste of heaven or hell. And that's it. In other words, prayers do help the dead, but we don't understand how that time works, because once you're dead, you're outside of what we call time. And so the point is, the idea of purgatory as a place where the temporal punishment will burn, you can even take it in a broad sense. St. Mark of Ephesus will even say that one could say it's a period of cleansing. But the point is, the ideas behind purgatory, especially the concepts of the merits of the saints, the treasury of the saints, the indulgences, all that stuff was created way later. So we don't buy into any of that. Superabundant merit. Yeah. So the point is, these are things that were, like viewing viewing the merits of the saints as a bank is kind of scary when you think about it. Why would you do that? Why not you, but why would anyone do
that? I again, that's way over my. I'm no apologist or anything, but it does seem to me. I mean, when you look at if you look at Sheol, again, it is a third place and it's still in existence. Now you could say, well, there's nobody there, but how do we know there's no one that goes there?
Well, we don't. Well, we know from the fathers of the church that, continually taught that. We know from the scriptures, there's no place where it says that they're going to Sheol. The assumption is you're making you can't make it. That's where one of the things where I remember how I got upset about the whole, the dead rising. Well, how do we know that they weren't baptized? We can't make the argument, how do we know? We know because the church taught. And all we have to do is look to the teachings of the fathers of the church and the sacred councils and the holy scriptures, and we get the answer. We don't have to, like one of the things that I found funny about Roman Catholic apologists, and
well, hold on.
Yeah.
Slow down. Mm-hmm. You said we get the answer, but if they don't comment on a particular area that the Bible speaks about, you don't get the answer from a non-comment. You can't say it didn't happen because they didn't comment on it.
Well, this is part of the reason. Have you ever heard of St. Vincent of Lérins?
Yes.
Okay, he's not usually regarded as a saint. I think he's a blessed in Roman Catholicism. They downgraded him after Hildebrand, and so on. But the whole point is, Saint Vincent wrote something called the Commonitorium, and I tried to explain this to Matt Slick, so I'll explain it to you. And what it basically says is, you hold to the traditions of the church as they have been held. You take the opinions of the ancients. Now, what happens if they don't agree on something? And if they don't agree on something, then you have to go with what was received by the majority of the church and held. And what if they don't say something on something? Then it's something on which we keep silent. In other words, there is a perfectly valid, I don't want to use the term system, but method in place to determine what the church always taught. And so, like toll houses, like when we talk about that, that's something you can find all the way back in the Desert Fathers and even further back. They mentioned it like a lot. And so the point.
Well, then if we go by what they did speak on, the early church fathers were unanimous with regards to John 3:5, referring to water baptism.
I don't disagree with you.
So therefore, in order to get into heaven, you have to have been water baptized.
Well, you have to have been, I don't say water baptized because that implies you can be Kool-Aid baptized. You have to be baptized. The point is, that's it. I agree with you. But the point is, and I would say that probably Matt Slick, whether he realizes it or not, probably agrees with you too. But the point, because of his whole covenant sign thing, which is basically just, I hate to say it, it's word played sacramental theology. But the point is, it's no one disagrees on John 3:5, and that's why I said I didn't disagree on John 3:5. I disagreed on Matthew 27:52, where we don't have the answer, we can't make it up, and every time we do that, we go wrong.
Well, but we do have the answer, because if you take Matthew 27:51 through 53 in combination with John 3:5, then you'll see.
You're assuming that everyone in the Old Testament then went through a baptism. The point is, the Old Covenant had circumcision. That was the mark.
But that was the Old Covenant.
That's where, if Christ died,
the baptism in John 3:5 is not referring to any, and it's not referring to John the Baptist, his baptism, or any Old Covenant baptism.
That's right. And now in Matthew 27:52, where was Christ?
He had just risen.
No, he had just died.
27. Wait, the Old Testament saints had risen out of their graves after Jesus had risen, didn't they?
No, I'm going to look that up. They actually came up after he died. It was a sign.
They rose before he rose? I thought they rose after.
No, you're right. They rose afterwards. Okay. But they were dead when he died. The point is, they were of the Old Covenant. They're not New Covenant.
But
they were a sign to people.
Also under the Old Covenant as well, but Jesus raised him back to life. And again, the early church fathers compared the Old Testament saints that came out of their graves to Lazarus. Therefore, if it's reasonable to assume that Lazarus had gone and received the New Covenant baptism, he and his family, then why would it not be reasonable to assume that the Old Testament saints that came back to life also received the New Testament water baptism?
Because they were dead.
Well, Lazarus was dead, and they were dead, and they were brought back to life. So they were no longer dead.
Okay, but do the fathers teach that they went and got baptized?
The early church fathers compared them to Lazarus. So if in order for Lazarus to get into heaven, would he have had to be water baptized?
I think you're missing my point. Did they or did they not talk about them? If you're saying that there's a comparison between them and Lazarus, we can see a parallel. But if that makes sense. But you can't dogmatically state. You can't state that the universal teaching of the fathers is that they went and got baptized, because they may have been righteous of the Old Covenant, in which case there would have been no need.
Well, if there was no need, then why couldn't they get into heaven?
We don't know that they didn't get into heaven. I would assume that when Christ preached to the spirits in hell, he brought them out. As a matter of fact, he could have brought them out and then they got their bodies back, in which case they're already there.
So you believe that simply Jesus dying on the cross was effectual to where they could get into heaven without water baptism, is what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is that for the people of the Old Covenant, yes, that was what was effectual, because they couldn't get in without the death of Christ.
Okay, but we see with regards to the death of Christ, it's linked to the waters of baptism, whereby you cannot enter into heaven unless you receive the waters of baptism, because it's linked to his saving blood that he died on the cross, by which we receive the grace. Therefore, you would have to say that without water baptism, even though the early church fathers were unanimous and said you have to get water baptized to get into heaven,
Well,
you would
do
have
and
to
I
say
do, but
you would have to say that there are exceptions, but they didn't make any exceptions. The early church fathers did.
They did make exceptions because they understood the difference between the old covenant and the new covenant. And more importantly, what you're implying is terrifying, because what you're saying is that basically Moses is not in heaven because his body was assumed.
No, that's not what I'm saying. And
How did he get baptized? Who baptized him?
Well, you're saying that Moses was assumed into heaven prior to Jesus' death on the cross?
Yeah, he was assumed into heaven like when he died.
No, he didn't go to heaven. No one went to heaven prior to Jesus' death on the cross.
I didn't say that. What I said is his body was assumed when he died. Now, if he went into heaven after the death and resurrection of our Lord, he didn't come back down and get baptized.
Yeah, but there's nothing in the Bible or the early church fathers claiming that. And I went through it. I could show you I could give you the link, because I looked at all of their comments with regards to that passage in Matthew 27, and none of them are claiming that the Old Testament saints, simply because Jesus died on the cross, they went to heaven.
I didn't. What I'm saying is after the resurrection of Christ, the Old Testament saints did go to heaven. The gates of heaven were open to them.
The gates of heaven is open to anyone that's water baptized, because the early church fathers were unanimous that you had to be water baptized in order for the gates of heaven to be open to you, because the only way to enter into the new covenant was through water baptism. There's no other way in order to enter into that new covenant whereby you could enter heaven, except through water baptism.
Using this argument, you would have to say that all the righteous of the Old Testament required baptism. Please stop saying water baptism. There's no other kind of baptism. In any case, the point I'm trying to make is that if they were all dead, what you'd have to say is they were all raised, they all went and got baptized by the... I mean, no offense, I've heard nothing like this in the Fathers. Absolutely nothing. And I see no reason to believe it. It makes no sense.
Well, but you said it makes sense with regards to Lazarus. Therefore, why would it not make sense with regard to the Old Testament saints?
I didn't say it made sense. I said I will say I don't remember. I thought I remember reading that Lazarus's family was baptized. But that does not mean that everyone was baptized.
Well, but now you're making exceptions, whereby the early church fathers did not make exceptions. They said that persons must get water baptized in order to enter into heaven. You're making an exception whereby they did not.
No, they did, because they made the distinction between the old and the new covenant, which is something you're not doing. And the point I'm trying to make, and again, just baptism, because it's just baptism. They had circumcision. It was the old covenant. Christ's death and resurrection brought them to heaven because they were righteous in those days. That is why we believe that Adam and Eve are in heaven.
But that's not what the early church fathers claim in their writings. In their writings, they said, no, it's not. They're not saying that Jesus' death on the cross, his death and resurrection alone, is what enters someone into the new covenant, whereby they can enter into heaven.
No, he had a heterohades. That's the meaning behind the icon.
They specifically say that in order for one to enter heaven, and they continually cite John 3:5 over and over again, they said in order for one to enter heaven, and that no one can enter heaven unless they receive water baptism. And they're not speaking of any type of baptism prior to the new covenant. John 3:5, they said, specifically refers to the new covenant baptism that Jesus instituted.
Mm-hmm. Because the old covenant, what is the form of initiation in the old covenant? We see this in the epistles. It's circumcision. There's an entire talk of profiting of circumcision, so on and so forth. The point is, all of that becomes worthless without Christ, because unless there is a hope of resurrection, everything they were doing in the old covenant was useless. So that's my point. That's why the church fathers don't have any details about baptizing old covenant saints, because they were waiting to be saved through the death and resurrection of our Lord. And so
Well,
when the fathers speak about requiring baptism in John 3:5, they're talking about us, people in the time of the new covenant, not people in the time of the old covenant.
so you're saying that these Old Testament saints, now that they're alive, they did not need to get water baptized.
Correct, because they followed all of the law of the Old Testament.
Yeah. And can you cite an early church father that said that they did not need to get water baptized because they followed the old law? Because we can see that Paul, rebukes anyone that follows the old laws and says, because
Yes,
you're following the old.
but he rebukes them
Yeah.
because you're supposed to follow the new law. The old law was fulfilled by the crucifixion and the resurrection.
Okay, so would you say that Lazarus would have been okay following the old laws, or did he have to go ahead and start following the new laws once it became binding, once Jesus instituted water baptism under his new covenant?
I apologize for not being clear earlier. I will try to be clearer. I do not know what the tradition is in the fathers concerning Lazarus and baptism. If there was a tradition concerning Lazarus and baptism, then I would say that that was something that was done to manifest the glory of God, because that is what the whole point of Lazarus being raised was to begin with. But did he need baptism? I don't know. If Christ foreknew, we assume he foreknew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And why he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead? Lazarus would have become part of the church then, because he was going to live longer. And if I remember correctly, Lazarus lives, St. Lazarus lives, well into the first few centuries of the first few decades of the church. So he would have been part of the church. And all those people who were alive at the time had to be baptized. Just because you were born a Jew at the time of Christ doesn't mean you didn't need to be baptized. You needed to be baptized because the Old Testament, with the death and resurrection of Christ, is over. Make sense?
Yeah, well, the thing is, we traditional Catholics, we don't make any exceptions when it comes to water baptism. We believe that John 3:5 is speaking about everybody, that there's not one individual that could get into heaven unless they've been water baptized. And so there are individuals that's in the Vatican II sect that would agree with you, and they constantly use the thief on the cross.
Okay, so you're saying the Most Holy Family monastery people don't believe that Elijah made it to heaven, or do they?
He didn't go to the heaven where God is.
Do you think he's there now?
Yes, he's there. All of the Old Testament saints are there now.
How'd they get there?
Through water baptism. They were water baptized prior to their dying the second time.
No one says that. You believe that? Okay, let me get this straight. You're saying that all of the saints from creation onwards were resurrected, even though it doesn't say that in the scriptures. It doesn't say that in the fathers. All got a water baptism and then just said, okay, guys, we're going back to our graves now.
Well, if you say that it's
5,000 years.
Well, yeah, but we don't know how many were amongst that, the Old Testament saints. They could have been now. I don't know why Matt Slick pointed to 1 Corinthians 15, I think it's 15:6, where he's speaking about the 500. And I didn't want to bring it up right then because I was like, where is he getting this 500 from? And so I went and looked at it, and it's saying over 500. It's not saying 500, it's saying over 500. So if that is referring to the Old Testament saints, it means that it's no less than 500. So it could be 501, could be 1,000, could be 10,000, we don't know. But the thing is, it wouldn't be silly to, instead it would be reasonable to assume that after Jesus had instituted water baptism under his new covenant, right after he was resurrected, then it would be reasonable to assume that they would have gone ahead and been obedient to entering into the new covenant.
It would not.
Well, let me just finish, because if it would be reasonable to assume that Lazarus, who was risen from death, would do so, then it would be reasonable to assume that the other Old Testament saints would do so as well.
You're using you're using a different version of the same language. You're now saying it would be reasonable to assume. In the first place, if we look at the scripture, it says, in the body of many saints who had fallen asleep were raised, not all of them. In the second one, after Jesus' resurrection, when they came out of the tombs, they entered the holy city and appeared to many people. St. John Chrysostom, I went and looked at this verse, refers to that as a sign from God to show people the reality of the resurrection. It does not say, A, that those people were not saved and needed to be baptized, or B, that it was anything more than a sign to the people. And I'm quoting St. John Chrysostom. You're telling me it's reasonable to say what the church fathers thought. And I'd like to hear you talk about the church fathers on that. And without going straight to John 3:5 and saying, but what did they mean about this? They were talking about us, not the Old Testament saints. So if you can help.
No, they were not talking about us. They were talking about anyone. It says, verily, verily, unless a man. It doesn't say men that came after the new covenant. It says, unless a man. It was speaking generally of any man. Therefore, in order for any man to enter into heaven, he has to get water baptized. And it would not be unreasonable to assume that they had gotten water baptized, since this is the case. There was plenty of opportunity for them to get water baptized. So now you said that not all of them had risen out of their graves. Where is that in the Bible where it says
it
not
says
all of them?
Many. It says many saints, not all the saints. Many saints.
But no, it says many saints were seen.
I mean,
isn't that correct?
I would think as a traditional Catholic, you would understand this distinction, because for many and for all are two very different things.
Well, does it say many were seen rising, or does it say many rose?
It said many rose. That means not all of them rose.
Well, I'd have to go back, and I don't know the Greek with regards to all this. Like I said, I'm not a Catholic apologist. Maybe a Catholic apologist would know the Greek with regards to all this. But
if you can help one of them come on our show, we'd really appreciate it.
Well, you said you spoke to which of the Diamond Brothers did you speak to?
I spoke to him over the phone about 10 years ago. He seemed really busy and a little bit, kind of like spazzed out. So I figured I'd just hang up. We responded to the Diamond Brothers video. People have asked about the Diamond Brothers. We are perfectly willing to have either of the Diamond Brothers on if they want.
Okay. Well, they would probably be able to, answer some of the questions you have, but or Mr. Jerry Matadix, he's a traditional Catholic as well.
He's been an apologist for years. Back when I was a Roman Catholic and I started in apologetics, he was like he was a big deal. I remember him.
I think he's going to debate William Albrecht sometime in the spring on the topic of sedevacantism.
We are not going to chase anyone down. We have this YouTube link. We're going to go. If it takes day 365, some Catholic apologist is going to have to answer, because we love the fact that a random person who's not an apologist, I appreciate your drive. I want to see you become Orthodox, because we can help you become an apologist and become part of the true church. But the point is, we're just going to keep going until one of them says, let's do this. And then we'll finally put on regular titles. But, did you have any other questions about Orthodoxy, though? I mean, because if we're going to talk about John 3:5, we already agree, except for the fact that we don't agree on Old Testament saints. That just makes no sense, and you're not going to find that.
So you believe there are exceptions then to John 3:5? See, that's the point
I don't believe there are exceptions. I believe that the Old Testament saints were dead, so they're not an exception. They didn't count.
Okay. Well, we just disagree on that, but that would have an exception to John 3:5, because it would be a certain group of people that would not need to get water baptized under the new covenant to get into heaven. So that would be an exception. But the thing is, we don't believe in making any. We traditional Catholics don't believe in making any exceptions, especially with regards to talking to Protestants, because they're all about exceptions, and they're all about whatever they can do to get away from water baptism. To say that it's not needed whatsoever, and that there's no connection between it and the Jesus sacrifice on the cross.
That's fine, and I understand the methodology in arguing with Protestants. It just doesn't make sense to me. Father, benedicite?
Benedicite.
You want to jump in?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, there actually are a few cases in the Fathers where they will talk about someone can receive the grace of baptism technically apart from the waters, because if you look in the funeral oration for the Emperor Valentinian II, which was given by St. Ambrose, he says, "But I hear that you're," and the Emperor Valentinian died on his way to be baptized. He was a catechumen. And the St. Ambrose says, "But I hear that you are grieving because he has not received the sacrament of baptism. Tell me whether we have complete control over anything other than our motive and our ability to ask." That he had already for a long time had that particular wish, namely that he should be initiated before he came to Italy. And more recently, he let it be known that he wished to be baptized by me. And for this, more than for any other reasons, he thought that I ought to be summoned. Is he not therefore in possession of the grace which he intended to receive, in possession of the grace that he demanded? And because he asked, he received, and that is why the text says, no matter by what kind of death the just man is forestalled, his soul will find rest. And St. Augustine says in his 7 books on baptism, in book 4, chapter 22, that the place of baptism is sometimes supplied by martyrdom, is supported by an argument by no means trivial, which the blessed Cyprian adduces from the thief, to whom, though he was not baptized, it was yet said, "Today shalt thou be with me in paradise." On considering which again and again, I find that not only the martyrdom for the sake of Christ may supply what was wanting of baptism, but also faith and conversion of heart, if recourse may not be had to the celebration of the mystery of baptism from want of time. For neither was that thief crucified for the name of Christ, but as the reward of his own deed. Nor did he suffer because he believed, but he believed while suffering. It was shown, therefore, in the case of that thief, how great is the power, even without the visible sacrament of baptism, and what the apostle says: "With the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is meant to salvation." But the one is supplied invisibly only when the administration of baptism is prevented, not by contempt for religion, but by the necessity of the moment. So
okay,
there are a few cases in which, not obviously not everybody, it's not by contempt for religion, but St. Ambrose and St. Augustine do seem to say that there are cases in which God will supply the grace if the water can't be found.
If somebody's a catechumen for 3 years and they get hit by a car 10 steps from the church, I mean,
yeah, exactly. Not if somebody's saying, "Well, I don't care, I'll postpone it 3, 5, 10 years, or whatever." Because of course we have the case of Saint Martin of Tours, where the catechumen, died, went to hell, and then God brought him, and then he was resurrected. He was brought back to life, and So there are some cases in which that will happen. Obviously, it's not the norm, but you still need that grace of being made part of the church that only God can give, and He gives through the sacrament of baptism. So.
Now, if you listen to the baptism of desire and baptism of blood debate that Brother Diamond had with one of the Vatican II sect apologists, he cited those two early church fathers, the Vatican II sect apologists. But Brother Diamond cited a whole list of other early church fathers that rejected baptism of desire and baptism of blood for those outside of the church that had not received the waters of baptism. So the majority of the early.
Could you give us an example of one of those fathers?
You'd have to speak to Brother Diamond, or if I could find that debate is probably on their YouTube channel. If you go to Vatican Catholic, unless it's on their website, but he gave a huge list because he knew that the Vatican II sect apologist was going to bring up both of those.
Oh, wait, and so he gave a question, because in talking to Roman Catholic, it's obviously two Roman Catholics talking to each other. Were the majority of the people he was listing born after the schism, and therefore we wouldn't accept them?
No, these were early church fathers, 1st, 2nd, 3rd century. So, okay. And he said that the majority of them were pretty much unanimous against baptism of desire.
Yeah, but did they actually say if someone is brought to the arena and as a catechumen and they're being tortured to death and they can't be baptized, no, they're going to hell? Or do they say something like, "You must be baptized"? Because the context of the quotation can mean a whole lot.
Exactly. We're big on context.
Well, he went ahead and read from some of them, and they actually cite the word desire, that if they could receive grace through their desire alone, and they said they don't see it. They can't see this.
You can't receive grace through your desire alone. It would have to be action. If a person is trying to get baptized and is prevented, then they would receive the grace. Not just somebody who says, "Oh, I'd like to be baptized," and goes back to eating, their Fruit Loops or whatever. The point is that that's not enough. No one would we don't disagree on that, but that doesn't necessarily take away baptism of desire, which is a very, very, very rare scenario, and martyrdom, which is not a very rare scenario at all.
Now, do y'all believe that it's impossible for God to bring the faith to someone that he knows would be open to it?
I don't understand your question.
If the Lord knows that someone would be open, like, for example, someone on a deserted island, that they would be open to the Christian faith, do you believe that it would be impossible for God to bring the faith to that person, or would it be possible for God to do so?
It's a question that, in all honesty, is usually left open. I've seen in the fathers that because you're talking about theoretical people, theoretically apart from God, that theoretically God is going to talk to, and I would say I have faith that He'd take care of it.
Well, we don't. It's not necessarily theoretical, because we have examples of this taking place, like, for example, with the Ethiopian eunuch and Cornelius and those with him, whereby he sent angels, right, to bring the faith and baptism.
So you're saying that maybe these people had an angel baptize them some split second before they died.
But St. Philip baptized the Ethiopian eunuch.
Right, but it was an angel that went ahead and made it known to him to go ahead and do this, and the angel, I guess, went ahead or God made him vanish right after baptizing the eunuch and brought him back to wherever he was prior.
Okay.
So at both times it was initiated by an angel.
Okay.
So
I mean,
again,
we don't disagree that supernaturally some can be brought to baptism. I believe that firmly, because that's how I was converted.
Right. So if God could do this, both bring the faith and baptism, supernaturally to someone that he knows is open to it.
Well, he didn't. He brought the faith supernaturally. The baptism was done by St. Philip.
Well, actually, the faith and the baptism was brought to Cornelius, and I mean, God through the Holy Spirit works through people. He brings the faith to people. He convicts people. So the Protestants are right about that.
Now, St. Cyril of Jerusalem also does teach baptism of blood, because he says in Catechetical Lecture, I just looked this up, Catechetical Lecture 3, Section 10, he says, if any man receive not baptism, he hath not salvation, except only martyrs, who even without the water receive the kingdom. For when the Savior, in redeeming the world by his cross, was pierced on the side, he shed forth blood and water, that men living in times of peace might be baptized in water, and in times of persecution in their own blood. For martyrdom also the Savior is wont to call a baptism, saying, can he drink the cup which I drink, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? And the martyrs confess by being made a spectacle unto the world, and to angels and to men, and thou would soon confess, but it is not yet the time for thee to hear of this. So, I mean, if we start finding like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10, 20, 30 fathers that say there is such a thing as martyrdom, baptism of blood for martyrs, what point will it become not just, one or two people? It will become, kind of an acceptable theory in your view.
Well, what if it works the other way around? Like I said, in that debate that Brother Diamond had with the Vatican II Sec apologists, the Vatican II Sec apologists cited 2 or 3 early church fathers, and then Brother Diamond, knowing that the Vatican II Sec apologists would cite these early church fathers, he was prepared for it, and he had a huge list of early church fathers that rejected baptism of blood and baptism of desire, and he read from them.
All we want is one. And I'm trying to find this, by the way. I can't find this video on the Vatican Catholic thing. I just want one of these fathers so we can look at the context.
If you put in baptism of desire on Vatican Catholic, there's a host of different baptism of desire debates he had, and there's one of them where he specifically cites the early church fathers, and he says there's no doubt after reading through the list of early church fathers that they overwhelmingly
is it baptism of desire debate 1 of 10 or 2 of 10 or what is it? This is, let me just see here.
Some of them are an hour long. Some of them are in parts.
I'm quickly going through this. I'm gonna shut the volume off on that, and I'm just gonna see the very best arguments for baptism of desire carefully addressed. I'm gonna just make it faster so that I can see this quickly. Okay, Council of Trent, that's useless to us. Let's see. Let's see here. Okay, that's okay. Let's see. That's Council of Trent, so that's useless. We continue further. Council of Trent, Council of Trent. Romans. Okay, what is this? Hold on, that's still Council of Trent. Pope Saint Gelasius. Finally, let's pause this. This is about. Let's see. Where does supposedly? Okay, let him heed what the blessed apostle Peter preaches. To say this is, okay. This is the letter to Flavian. Let him not skip over the same apostle's words, knowing that you've been redeemed from the empty way of life you inherited from your fathers, not with corruptible gold and silver, but by the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Let's continue. Okay, and then it says, hold on, I went too far. I'm trying to see where this is. Okay, because he basically quotes the letter to Flavian.
I mean, there's also St. Gregory Nazianzen, who says an oration on the Holy Lights 39, section 17, that I know also a fourth baptism, that by martyrdom in blood, by which also Christ himself was baptized. This one is far more august than the others, since it cannot be defiled by later sins. St. John Chrysostom says on the Panegyric on Lucian, do not be surprised that I call martyrdom a baptism, for here too the Spirit comes in great haste, and there is a taking away of sins and a wonderful, marvelous cleansing of the soul. And just as those being baptized are washed in water, so to those being martyred are washed in their own blood.
But my point is, he's talking about
that's more than, so it's more than like 2 or 3. Now it's 4. Now it's 5. I mean,
okay, let me see here, because he obviously this Peter Diamond.
And then Saint Fulgentius of Rusp, who says in his rule on faith that for at that time, at which our Savior said, if anyone is not reborn of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. No one can without the sacrament of baptism, except those who, in the Catholic Church, without baptism, poured out their blood for Christ, receive the kingdom of heaven and life eternal.
Okay, now here he's arguing. I'm watching this baptism of desire. Okay, so here we see some Bishop Robert McKenna argues to them, and they basically point to Council of Trent, Council of Florence. I'm really not seeing these fathers, and the quote of Saint Leo to Flavian is talking about the necessity of baptism. No one is doubting that. We're not saying that that's not the case. But in any case, I'm still looking for fathers. Catholic Encyclopedia, Saint Cyprian, ellipsis, of course, judging and holding it certain that no one out beyond the pale, that is outside the church, is able to be baptized. We don't disagree with that anyway. Bellarmine, his interpretation of Luke, Alphonsus Liguri. Amazingly, I found exactly 2 fathers who don't mean at all what Brother Diamond or whoever is arguing. And I see lots of Trent quotes, lots of Alphonsus Liguri quotes, Bellarmine, the usual suspects. I expect to see Thomas Aquinas eventually, but these are not church fathers.
Well, like I said, it's one of their baptism desire debates whereby they actually quote the church fathers in the debate, and because the Vatican II apologists quoted them.
Yeah, I mean, we've quoted 5 church fathers that say baptism in blood already.
Now here's my point. Even in this baptism desire video where he's arguing against it, he admits to baptism of blood. So if he doesn't admit to baptism of blood later, he's being dishonest. But more importantly, my guess is the reason why this Vatican II Catholic and this Most Holy Family Monastery Catholic sound like they basically like one beat the other is because they're just basically both using tiny little quotes. We would actually analyze the quotes of each father, and most likely with, I'd say 100% certainty, actually, they wouldn't mean what, they say they're meaning. Make sense?
Well, the thing is, yeah, that makes sense. But the thing is, I would have to agree with the Diamond Brothers with regards to John 3:5, because Jesus himself says, unless a man is water baptized, he cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven.
Well, he says,
and I don't believe there's
baptized with water and the Spirit. Water baptized. We don't believe in Kool-Aid baptism. I think one father once mentioned sand baptism, but there was an assumption that there was water in the sand, and even that had to be redone. We don't deny John 3:5 or the necessity of using water in baptism. That's not. We don't have like a special milk baptism or anything like that. The point I'm trying to make is it's an odd argument. Now I can understand why the Diamond Brothers and the traditional papists might be annoyed, and that's because of the universalism espoused by the Vatican II apologists. If you look in Lumen Gentium and so on and so forth, where they're saying basically everyone's going to be saved. And the point is, that is unacceptable. That's not the teaching of the church. But that doesn't make you any less wrong on this issue, because the church fathers do teach baptism of desire and baptism of blood.
Well, again, if you, I'm going to have to get that debate for y'all, and
we would really appreciate it. Yeah, totally. And hey, bring a Diamond Brother with you,
because he was prepared for that Vatican II apologist, and as soon as that Vatican II apologist mentioned the early church fathers, Brother Diamond ran off a huge list of the early church fathers and gave their comments whereby they rejected baptism of blood and baptism of desire.
Well,
for those that are, we're not. And another thing, the Vatican II sect, they've expanded it beyond catechumens. They've expanded it for Hindus, for Muslims, even atheists.
in all honesty, I hate to say this, but to some degree, that's a logical outgrowth of the idea of mechanical salvation. And, it's bound to happen. And this is part of the reason why we just tell people to become Orthodox and join the true church, because you're going to find that these two extremes they're the only two ways it can come out, and they both collapse upon themselves. They're both a bad system that was invented in the 11th century. If you want to know the church fathers and you want to know their teachings and you want to join the true church, you got to join us. But we'd be glad to review their stuff. No problem with it. We've been waiting for it. We're on day 4. We'll go to day 5 tomorrow.
You might want to also review their debate they had on the papacy with a Protestant, and that was a pretty good debate as well. They were defending the papal office.
Father Joseph, am I correct to say that you said the Diamond Brothers were saying baptism of blood was correct or not?
Well, in this debate, this particular debate hold on, where is it? This Vatican Catholic channel, there's this one channel called Baptism of Desire Buried. And in one of those cases, it literally lists martyrdom. When he does list it with St. Cyprian, he says, basically that baptism or martyrdom are the only two ways in. And so the point is, he even includes the baptism of blood in the argument against baptism of desire.
Okay, so they're admitting baptism of blood already.
For now. That's my point. It's not a consistent argument.
All right.
No, they're not. You must be misreading that, because they're definitely against baptism of blood for anybody that's outside the church, anyone that has not been water baptized.
Well, the whole point is they're baptized in blood. They're inside the church.
Well, St. Cyprian says in letter 72, section 22, on which place some, as if by human reasoning, they were able to make void the truth of the gospel declaration, object to us the case of catechumens, asking if any one of these, before he is baptized in the church, should be apprehended and slain on confession of the name, whether he would lose the hope of salvation and the reward of confession because he had not previously been born again of water. Let men of this kind, who are aiders and favorers of heretics, know therefore first that those catechumens hold the sound faith and truth of the church, and advance from the divine camp to do battle with the devil, with a full and sincere acknowledgement of God the Father, and of Christ, and of the Holy Ghost. Then that they certainly are not deprived of the sacrament of baptism, who are baptized with the most glorious and great baptism of blood, concerning which the Lord also said that he that had another baptism to be baptized with. But the same Lord declares in the gospel that those who are baptized in their own blood and sanctified by suffering are perfected and obtain the grace of the divine promise when he speaks to the thief believing and confessing in his very passion and promises that he should be with himself in paradise. Wherefore we who are set over the faith and truth ought not to deceive and mislead those who come to the faith and truth and repent and beg that their sins should be remitted to them, but to instruct them when corrected by us and reformed for the kingdom of heaven by celestial discipline. But someone may say, what then shall become of those who in the past times, coming from heresy to the church, were received without baptism? The Lord is able by his mercy to give indulgence and not to separate from the gifts of his church those who by simplicity were admitted into the church, in the church had fallen asleep. That's about the whole whether one should rebaptize heretics or not. That's the whole question. But my point is that this is, again, I think the 6th church fathers, so it's not like 2 or 3 people We're getting now to additional ones. My point is that this wasn't just some crazy view invented in, I don't know, the 15th century by some, or 18th century by some evangelical Protestants. You're having church fathers in the, 3rd and 4th century that are saying, yes, catechumens who were taken and they're tortured and they refuse to renounce Christ and they're killed and the waters cannot touch them. God will give them the grace in their blood that they could not receive in the water. So, I don't see how this is really a controversial view when you're having the church fathers teach it.
Well, again, if you have more church fathers that taught against it, then what do you do with that?
We have to make a distinction here, because the arguments that you're having with Protestants, and this is one of the things that I found distasteful, was that you kept referring to Protestants as opposed to the person you were talking to. But more importantly, Protestants in general, I understand they separate the necessity of baptism from baptism. They said, they try to say it's just faith and that the baptism is just a sign. Some Protestants do that. I have no doubt of that, but some don't. The more important question, however, is that what the church taught? And the church taught that if you intend to be baptized, but somehow are prevented, that's okay. If you are martyred, you've given your life over for Christ, that's okay. Otherwise, it's just baptism. We don't teach that there's that there's some other way that, if you feel that we're not just saying all you have to do is believe in Jesus. And so it's kind of an invalid argument with us. What we're saying is, what do the fathers of the church teach? And what the fathers of the church teach is what the Orthodox Catholic Church teaches. There's no way around that.
Well, the thing is, if I'd have to get that debate and show y'all, because he cited the early church fathers. And if you have the majority of early church fathers, even the Vatican II Apologists, when Brother Diamond cited all the early church fathers and read their commentary, the Vatican II Apologists admitted that most of the early church fathers did not believe in baptism of blood and baptism of desire. They didn't accept it.
Okay, I'm not trying to be rude. Both Father Enoch and I have, we've debated Roman Catholics online on some of these texts. And what we found is that in general, when papists quote a church father, a lot of the time they quote him wrong. And so I don't doubt that Brother Diamond or Michael or whoever he was did quote various church fathers in a very selective way to say what he wanted it to say. But that doesn't mean he's quoting them correctly. And that's why we need to see which fathers he's quoting and how. So it is very important. I cannot stress this enough. It's not that we don't believe you. It's just that based on our discussions and arguments with Roman Catholic apologists online, in general, their presentation usually isn't as honest as it would seem. And we'd love to fact check them. So we want to see it. We want to see what you're talking about, just so we can take it apart.
Now, their email, if maybe you might want to email them, is mhfm1@aol.com. Maybe
they know of our existence. They can reach out.
Oh, they do? Okay.
I'm not sure what your name is. I don't know what to call you.
Oh, James.
Okay. All right. So James, part of the other issue is, our Lord said, "Except you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you." You agree with that, correct?
Yeah, and they went ahead and...
my point is that, so if somebody's baptized but they don't give communion, do they have life in them, yes or no?
Well, Brother Diamond addresses that issue on his website. He says that it's saying you, so it's addressing those that are already in the church, whereas John 3:5 is making a general statement with regards to all of mankind, saying that unless a man enter into the kingdom of, be water baptized, he cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. So there's the distinction there.
So according to you, then, members of the church must absolutely receive communion or they will not have life within them, correct?
For those in the church, if they're capable of doing so, if they're not, then they can't. But hold on, because it's speaking to those in the church. And again, you'd have to go to what Brother Diamond said on his website, because he goes into detail as to why you can't use that as an example. Because again, Vatican II apologists have used that.
Well, see, to be honest, it doesn't really matter to me what they say, because they can be heretics for this and they can be right with that.
Right.
That's irrelevant. I mean, they can be wrong about 95% of things and right about 5%, or wrong about right about 1% of the thing. That's really an irrelevant issue about whether the Vatican II people are saying this or not.
Yeah,
we're not. Why that's with me. Yeah, with us. I'm not trying to argue with you, but you keep on bringing that up like we should be afraid that the Vatican II people are saying it. but they
I
just
was a
might have this
Vatican II
one point.
person.
They might just be right about this one thing and wrong about 1 million other things. I mean, for example, are you saying that no Roman Catholic theologian in the 18th, and that there were no Roman Catholic popes or theologians or whatever that taught baptism of desire or baptism of blood?
I don't, from my understanding, prior to the Vatican II Council, prior to John the 23rd, I don't think there's any true popes that dogmatically or infallibly taught baptism of desire and baptism of blood.
So it was left up as an opinion, basically a theological opinion, in other words.
Correct. And
okay, so in other words, you're saying it's a theological opinion. You cannot make it a doctrine, in other words, right?
well, what I'm saying is, from my understanding, the church has already infallibly condemned the idea of baptism of desire and baptism of blood with regards to what Pope Leo said, because he said if anybody is martyred outside of the
Pope
church.
Leo who? Pope Leo the what? Well, if he's martyred, who? Pope Leo the who? Leo the first, the second, what?
13th.
Let's see. Let me get you that teaching. Hold on. I'll post it for you.
Right. Yeah, no problem.
Hold on.
Excuse me. So,
Are there any other questions we have been asked,
Yeah,
Father,
well,
in the meantime?
well, yeah. Actually, I said I would address one on the show while we're waiting for James there. Basically, somebody was asking about the trueorthodoxy.org site and whether it's a good apologetic site. And basically, that's Archbishop Gregory of Colorado versus everyone. And so the problems with that is that you can find most of the stuff he's talking about, which is good on sites like orthodoxinfo.com without having to join his particular grouping. And most of his stuff on other true Orthodox churches is, I hate to say it, it's trash. I'll be glad to debate any point of it. It's useless. So I'm not even. It's just not a good site. Use orthodoxinfo.com. Use the church fathers. Use other sites. Just we don't have to look for. The whole point of learning Orthodox apologetics is learning how to defend the faith, not follow some new guy. James, you back?
I think he's trying to get the quote.
Oh, I thought he popped up on the screen there because he was talking. Okay, so I wasn't sure.
No.
But okay. Now someone Gregory is saying Pius the IX, and I think Atomic Lead said Leo the 12th. But in any case, either way, we wouldn't regard those as church fathers because they're like really late Roman Catholics. Any other good sites you can recommend? There's let's see. Well, I'd recommend my own, but I'm still rebuilding it, and that's letasattendapologetics.wordpress.com. Again, orthodoxinfo.com. Also, I would go with what are some other ones? I'd go with the Christian Classics Ethereal Libraries Church Fathers site. You can't really go wrong with 30 volumes of the Church Fathers. There's Tertullian.org, which has a number of other fathers that are translated by Roger Pierce. And that's just the stuff in English. There are the Patrologias are both online now. Father, do you have any sites you particularly like recommending? I know you've.
Well, the Tertullian.org site. I mean, obviously not Tertullian, but the other stuff on it.
Yeah.
So that's. I think those are the best ones. I mean, you can if you actually search on Google Books, you can actually find a lot of free preview stuff. If you search for Internet Archive for PDFs, you can actually find a lot of books that were translated back even in the 30s and 40s, which the copyrights have expired. So no one thought to renew them. You can find actually interesting books if you search. on that mechanism. So that's what I do a lot.
Yeah, the key is using the search mechanism for what you're looking for and getting as much info as you can on it. And there's a lot of info out there. And that's it, because one of the big canards about doing Orthodox apologetics I've heard over the years, which is, finally being put to death, is that, most of the stuff hasn't been translated. Well, there's a lot of stuff that's been translated. So, before we start saying you can't defend the church based on the fathers in translation, you're talking about thousands upon thousands of pages of data. If a person reads just that stuff alone, they're going to have a better understanding of Orthodoxy than a lot of people in the world, even. So that's what I would say. So there's no need to go to some specific guy's site, and who's gonna lead you the wrong way. When it comes to Orthodox apologetics, stick to the fathers. There's plenty of stuff there.
Now, I should note in St. Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People, and I'll put this in if you can find it on the sourcebooks.fordham.edu/basis/b-book1 period ASP. If you look in the section that is it's book 1, chapter 7, it's the Passion of St. Alban, and St. Bede. I remember this. St. Bede says, it says, at the same time was also beheaded the soldier who before through divine admonition refused to give the stroke to the holy confessor, of whom it is apparent that though he was not regenerated by baptism, yet he was cleansed by the washing of his own blood and rendered worthy to enter the kingdom of heaven. Then the judge, astonished at the novelty of so many heavenly miracles, ordered the persecution to cease immediately, beginning to honor the death of the saints, by which he before thought they might have been diverted from the Christian faith. So, anyway, I'm not trying to argue, but I didn't think this was a whole big issue, because I
don't really think it is. I think it's just two extreme positions that were debating each other, and we walked in on the middle of it. But in any case, it's still been inspiring to see if we can find Roman Catholic apologists. But,
I think we've kind of done it to death until we actually get the information. Then we can do a show on it or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And we love debunking this stuff. This is what we're like. I guess you could call us the Mythbusters of Christianity.
Nah.
All right. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. James, you back yet?
I think he's still looking for it.
Okay. Well, we'll give him a couple of minutes more. I was thinking we were
okay.
Okay. Hey, James.
One, let me see. Are you still able to hear me? I'm on that other page.
We can hear you just fine. At least I can.
Okay, I'm on their website. It's not the one that I was looking for, but it is one in which the Pope St. Leo the Great, dogmatic letter to Flavian, Council of Chalcedon 451.
Right, we know that letter.
The Tome of St. Leo.
It says, in other words, the spirit of sanctification and the blood of redemption and the water of baptism, these three are one and remain indivisible. None of them is separable from its link with the others. Okay. So it's impossible for somebody to receive the sanctifying grace of baptism.
What section is that? What section of the letter is that in?
I don't know. All it has is 451 after it. So
okay, hold on.
We'll find it. Give us a second.
The Tome, the Flavium. Now, by the way, I'm using the Tertullian.org/father site, which I would recommend people use. Okay, to Flavian, commonly called the Tome. Okay, so what was the exact quote again, James?
It says, in other words, it says the spirit of water and blood. He's citing 1 John and these three are one. 1 John 5:4-8. In other words, he's saying the spirit of sanctification and the blood of redemption and the water of baptism, these three are one and remain indivisible. None of them is separable from its link with the others.
Okay. Right. Okay.
So
I found it. It's that is the spirit of sanctification and the blood of redemption and the water of baptism. These three things are one and remain undivided. None of them is disjoined from connection with the others. Because the Catholic Church lives and advances this faith that Christ Jesus, we should believe neither manhood to exist without true Godhead, nor Godhead without true manhood. But when Eutyches, being unquestioned in your examination, of him answered, I confess that our Lord was of two natures before the union, but after the union I confess one nature. I am astonished that so absurd and perverse a profession as this of his was not rebuked by a censure on the part of any of his judges, that an utterance extremely foolish and extremely blasphemous was passed over, just as if nothing could be heard which could give offense, seeing as it is impious to say that the only begotten Son of God was of two natures before the incarnation. Is it shocking to affirm that since the Word became flesh, there has been in him one nature only. This is talking about the unity of the God-man. This has nothing to do with baptism.
It says water baptism. It's obviously speaking about water baptism, and it's connecting water baptism to the sanctification. It says right there, the spirit of sanctification and the blood of redemption and the water of baptism. He's saying these three are one and they remain indivisible. None of them is separable from its link with the others.
Okay, well, if we read before that, you can see that you're clearly taking it out of context. What it says is, let him listen also to the blessed apostle Peter, that when he declares that, quote, sanctification by the Spirit takes place through, quote, the sprinkling of the blood of Christ, and let him not give a mere cursory reading to the words of the same apostle, quote, knowing that ye were not redeemed with corruptible things, as silver and gold, from your vain way of life received by your tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Jesus Christ as of a lamb, without blemish and without spot. Unquote. Let him also not resist the testimony of the blessed John the Apostle, and the blood of Jesus, the Son of God, cleanses us from all sin. End quote. And again, this quote, this is the victory which overcometh the world, even our faith. And quote, he who is he that overcometh the world, but he that believeth that Jesus is the Son of God? That is he that came by water and blood, even Jesus Christ. Not in water only, but in water and blood. And it is the Spirit that beareth witness, because the Spirit is truth. For there are three that bear witness, the Spirit, the water, and the blood, and the three are one. Then it gets to your quote, that is the Spirit of sanctification and the blood of redemption and the water of baptism, which three things are one and remain undivided, and not one of them is disjointed from connection with the others, because the Catholic Church lives and advances his faith that by Christ Jesus we should believe that neither manhood to exist without true Godhead, nor Godhead without true manhood. This is about the unity of Christ. There's no other way to interpret that.
I think what James is saying is that St. Leo was making a connection between the inseparability of these aspects of baptism, just as they're inseparable, so is the humanity and divinity in Christ. I think that's what he's trying to say.
But it certainly would be used to advance an argument against martyrdom.
Well, what Pope St. Leo defines that he's saying the sanctification, the spirit of sanctification, the blood of redemption cannot be separated from the water of baptism. He's saying you must be baptized with water to receive the spirit of sanctification and the blood of redemption, according to what words are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that he's saying, he's making a declaration on martyrdom at all, or even discussing the question of baptism of desire.
He's going ahead and making the case that the grace from Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, you cannot obtain that grace unless through the waters of baptism. He's making that
as a baptism apart from Jesus Christ would be worthless. I understand that, but what I'm saying is that's not saying what you're saying.
Well, you're saying that you can. You're saying that if you accept baptism of desire and baptism of blood, you're saying it is possible to go ahead and receive the spirit of sanctification and the blood of redemption without the water. You're saying it is possible that there are exceptions. He's not making any exceptions. He says it's impossible to do that.
Spirit and blood, and martyrs have blood. So the point is that destroys that argument. That's gone. As to baptism of desire, again, he's not talking about that. But you can't make an argument.
But he is talking about that because he's condemning the idea that in other words, he's saying there is no possibility whereby you can receive the spirit of sanctification and the blood of redemption except through water baptism. So there are no exceptions.
Okay, so I'm looking here because I typed in Pope St. Leo and baptism of desire, and of course I find Most Holy Family Monastery. So we'll see where the Diamond Brothers are quoting. Let me see here. Okay, he says nothing about that. Okay, let's see here. This is letter 16. Then he quotes Pope Eugene IV. There's not even an argument here talking about the necessity, that he's saying that there's no baptism by martyrdom.
Let me ask you this question, Deacon. can one receive the spirit of sanctification and the blood of redemption apart from water baptism? Is it possible for anyone to receive that apart from water baptism?
If they're a martyr for Christ, yeah.
Then you're disagreeing then with Pope Saint Leo the Great.
No, I'm not. I'm disagreeing with Pope Eugene and the Most Holy Family Monastery because Pope St. Leo didn't say that.
He did say that. He said the spirit of sanctification and the blood of redemption and the water of baptism, these three are one and remain indivisible. You're saying it is possible.
What we have pointed out is that multiple church fathers have said that through the martyrdom, as when Christ died, blood and water came out, that the water in the blood washes over them because they confessed Christ and died for his name. I'm not denying the water. You are.
No, I'm simply not. I'm simply agreeing with what Pope Leo's saying. I'm saying that you cannot disconnect the waters of baptism with the sanctifying grace from Jesus' sacrifice on the cross.
And that would be useful if you were arguing with a Protestant who does, in many cases, do believe that. But we don't believe that, so it's a moot point to me.
But you do believe that, and the Vatican II sect believes that as well because you make exceptions. You're saying there are cases where this could happen.
I'm saying that the fathers taught there were cases where this happens.
Well, again, Brother Diamond presented more fathers that taught against it.
Brother Diamond doesn't even know where to receive communion. I wouldn't trust his patristic readings. I'm just saying.
Again, I would just urge you to, maybe email him and maybe y'all could have a discussion there and about
have you
that.
Ever contacted him?
Have I? What?
Have you ever contacted him?
It was a few years ago, maybe about 10 years ago.
Okay. Well, would you be willing to ask him to come on? Because I'm not going to do much more, and this is maybe lazy of me, but I think if we just, I personally think this is so far the best method so far to use. Again, if I'm going to just hammer my points down. If what you're saying is that St. Leo specifically taught that there is no other form of baptism than water baptism, I would say that this is an insufficient quote for that. If what you are saying is that the fathers who teach that martyrdom is acceptable unto God, they're wrong, then you have to show me church fathers who specifically say that such a teaching is wrong. St. Leo did not do that. So if you're pointing to Brother Diamond supposedly quoting all these church fathers, he can contact us himself and send us a list. Because frankly, so far I've seen St. Leo misquoted, and that's as far as we've gone. And that's not much. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just saying, if he wants to come on, we'd love to discuss every one of these fathers. How many fathers have we discussed in comparison? You had to go looking for Most Holy Family's thing, and you found one, which we
quoted 5 or 6, I believe.
And we put St. Leo in context. So it's not like we're avoiding the fathers here. We'd be glad to discuss them. But my guess is that they're not going to want to come on because they get kind of nervous when they have to deal with Orthodox, because we love dealing with the fathers. We have no problem with that.
Okay. And I'm not sure if it was Pope Leo. There's another one, maybe it was Pope Eugene. I'm not sure. I'm trying to find it where he specifically said that you cannot, he spoke against baptism of blood with regards to anybody outside of the church.
I believe that would be Pope Eugene IV. He is a Roman Catholic Pope, not an Orthodox Pope. We wouldn't accept him.
Okay. Well, like I said, I think the Brother Diamond is correct with regards to, because based on John 3:5, I don't see any way out of that.
But the fathers interpreted it differently. So the question is, here's a question. If the majority of the fathers were to say that John 3:5 is interpreted like we're saying, would you then say it was correct?
I would.
Okay.
Now let me ask you the same question.
So,
ask you the same question. Sure, if the majority of the fathers, if the majority of the fathers were against baptism of blood and baptism of desire, then would you accept that baptism of desire?
We always accept what the fathers.
Sure, exactly. It has to be the majority of the fathers, and it can't just be them being quoted in some, angular way, or something.
Exactly.
If the majority of the fathers say, all these people being martyred in the Colosseum, when before they could get baptized, the Romans dragging them off, those people just going right to hell. Too bad, If they said that, okay, well, that's what the fathers teach.
Many of those martyrs are actually in the lives of the saints. So I'm curious to see how this works. I mean, in all honesty, that's why if we sound overconfident, it's not because we're overconfident, it's because we're confident. There's no if to it, because for us, the criterion of the church is the fathers. It's not what the popes say, and then we try to shove some fathers in there. We go by the fathers. And so that's why we're not really worried. We would have found it by now, is my point. It's not that it's like we're like these great geniuses. The church did it for us. The point is we just follow what the fathers say.
All right. Well,
I do find it curious, though, that the person that he was debating admitted that the majority of early church fathers rejected baptism of desire and baptism of blood.
So what? That's some Vatican II guy. Who cares?
Who cares about some Vatican II guy? They teach that Buddhists can go to heaven.
Yeah, that's true. They do teach that.
I mean, I don't really care. I mean, the Vatican II people do all kinds of crazy stuff. So
they have clown masses. They're just. I was a Vatican II.
Anybody in communion with Pope Francis, the so-called Pope, I don't take seriously. So,
yeah. I mean, and if they're defending Pope Francis, we really don't take them seriously.
Okay.
Oh, that's mean. That's mean. We should take them. Well okay.
I just don't. I mean,
yeah, but we got to tell the Papal. We want them to come on. If we tell them,
all right, I get it.
Now there is a YouTuber. He goes by the name Catholic Fusionist, and he's an apologist, and he debates numerous Protestants on YouTube. He may be able to go ahead and.
We'd love to have him.
Now I don't think he's a member of the Vatican II sect from some of the things he said. I may be wrong about that. He might be SSPX or something. I'm not sure, but he sounds like a traditionalist.
We will debate any papal apologist.
Okay, and I don't know his position on. There are some who claim to be traditionalists, and yet they accept baptism of desire. So he might be one of those that accepts it. So I don't know. I would rather if Brother Diamond, if y'all were able to speak to either Michael Diamond or Brother Peter Diamond.
If they're welcome to come on. I'm sure everyone here, including yourself, can contact them. I think I sent something because when we first created that video, as I mentioned, our first video was answering, the Diamond Brothers, and we have not heard from them ever since. And we've even put our video in their link, so they've seen it. They know we're here. So we'd love it if they come on, but they probably won't because they're scared.
Yeah, but personally, I believe that if God could bring the faith to someone, I don't know how it is with the Orthodox, but in Catholicism, from what I understand, the sacrament of faith has always been understood since apostolic times as being baptism, the sacrament of baptism. Yeah, I think y'all call it the mystery.
Yeah, we believe that. We were both baptized in Orthodoxy.
So, and we believe that, for example, if you look at Titus 3:5 and you compare that to Ephesians, what Protestants like to point to, Ephesians 2:8 through 9, we believe that when it's speaking about the faith, it's speaking about initial justification, initial sanctification through water baptism in Ephesians, because if you look at what Ephesians 2:8 through 9 is saying, and you compare it to Titus 3:5, they're speaking about the exact same thing, only they're wording it slightly differently.
Okay,
and then if you go back, early church fathers, with regards to Titus 3:5, all claim that it's speaking about water baptism.
Well, no one's denying this, but here, I want to show you something really handy. Do you see this link that I put there, the ccl.org/fathers?
It's not activated, Father.
Hold on, let me see.
Let me try to put an activated thing.
Is that in here or in the YouTube chat?
In the YouTube, not in the YouTube chat. It's in the YouTube chat. Okay, I just put it again. Now it's activated. It's in the YouTube chat. So you click that there, and I want to show you something really cool. Whenever you want to know what the church fathers teach, at least two of them, on a particular part of the scriptures, go down to Nicene and post-Nicene fathers. And what you'll find is that both St. Augustine and St. Chrysostom's homilies on the various Gospels and epistles are there. And you can actually go chapter by chapter and see what the fathers wrote on specific verses. So, that is something that may be handy to you in the future. And I'm just telling you that now. Everyone should know that, because that way you already know at least two of the biggest church fathers, what they said on the matter. Easiest thing in the world. All you have to do is click the link, keep that there, put it, make it a thingy. What do you call those? A favorite, a bookmark. But in any case, the point is that using that, you'll be able to more effectively understand the mind of the fathers. And that's what we're aiming for here.
So the thing is, when we consider them speaking about God bringing the faith to someone, we're not just saying we're not saying he's just bringing intellectual assent or some heartfelt belief.
No,
we believe that the faith includes baptism.
Of course,
that is what's occurring there.
Yeah.
So for example, a person on an island that God knows is open to the faith, he would be open to the faith. St. Thomas Aquinas was asked about this, and he said, if need be, God would send an angel to that person so as to bring the faith.
Well, we don't recognize Thomas Aquinas, but again, he's theoretically postulating. That's a theoretical question.
Well, but he's doing it based on scripture, like, for example, with Cornelius and the eunuch, the Ethiopian eunuch.
But
so we know that it
wasn't on an island. He was brought to St. Philip.
Yes, but it was an angel in both cases that initiated all the actions to take place.
But then we would
an angel obviously sent by God. So we know that it is possible for God to send angels, and not just in those two cases. Throughout the Bible, God has sent angels to intervene in many cases.
But he's always had a purpose in doing so. And in both the cases of the Cornelius and the Ethiopian eunuch, apostles were sent to them. What you're talking about is a theoretical possibility of someone being on an island with no way to reach anyone. And that's not something I want to speculate on. And I don't think now Thomas Aquinas is almost the father of scholasticism, which is why his theology is all over, its fingerprints are all over Roman Catholicism, they're all over Protestantism. And the point is, it's all theoretical speculation. But when we talk about angels coming down to men to help them, we believe that's a real thing. We don't
y'all have your Orthodox? I thought y'all had. I know in Catholicism we've had several instances where Catholic saints have been transported automatically by God, missionary saints, to certain locations just for the purpose of bringing the faith and water baptizing. Aren't there examples in that in your Orthodox church as well?
You're saying, what are you talking about? You're saying that they literally were sent, or you're saying that they were just magically transported over from one side to the other to baptize people?
Magically transported.
Never heard of anything like that. Have you heard of anything like that in Orthodoxy, Father?
It's possible.
It's theoretically possible.
No, what I'm saying, there could be instances in the Church Fathers where saints have been brought to people to baptize them, or or to celebrate Mass, or do things like that. Yes, I think God can do that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, are you saying, James, that you're thinking that if God sends an angel, you think God could theoretically? Okay, let's do that. Could theoretically send an angel to baptize somebody? Correct.
Oh, I believe that God could have an angel do it as well.
So
I believe
you think then that the examples of baptism of blood would be cases where God sends an angel who basically could baptize somebody in the split second before they died?
Yes, I do believe that is possible for someone.
That's just. I mean, I'm not arguing or anything, but that's essentially okay. Fine, all right, okay.
But water is included. Water is not excluded. In other words,
if God finds some way to do the water, yes. My point is that they're not going to die from, they're being tortured, and if they truly have faith in the true faith, God can send an angel, and if the angel puts a little bit of water, however they do it, you would accept that could happen, correct?
Correct. As long as water is not disconnected, as Pope Leo said, you cannot disconnect it from the grace of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. Therefore, it always must be part of it. And therefore,
in a Colosseum, theoretically, could the angel extract the water from the blood and put it on him?
Absolutely, well, then we're getting into technicalities then.
Yeah,
okay, fine. That's a good solution you got there, James.
Angel's on the head of a pin.
We have a good solution here.
As long as water is a component of it and it's never excluded, then yes. And that's why I believe that with regards to babies that were aborted, in Catholicism, in the Council of Florence, it says that babies that did not receive water baptism go to hell. I believe that all babies go to heaven. Personally, I believe this. There's no Catholic teaching on this, but personally, I believe that God sends angels to water baptize all of these babies that are aborted or babies that have not received water baptism from a human being. I believe that God does send angels to do it.
There are fathers who teach on the fate of unbaptized infants.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I mean,
they're not. It's not exactly that. I was under the impression that unbaptized infants go to the upper abode, not to heaven directly. I thought they went to something.
James is giving a theory about what could happen.
Right. But what do the fathers say is my point. We have to always focus on that. And I know you've quoted it from the thing on unbaptized infants before, Father.
Yeah, I mean, basically they go to Hades. I mean, that's
the upper regions of Hades.
Yes, I mean it's not a whole lot of, but
it's not. It would be with Abraham's bosom, so on and so forth. But the point is, it's not a bad place, but they weren't baptized. I don't want to create. That's part of the reason why I don't like these theoretical concepts.
Well, what James is saying is technically they're being baptized before they're dying, so these aren't unbaptized infants.
But there's no fathers that teach that. It's theoretical.
Okay. Yeah. I understand that.
That's why the fathers are so handy, James, because they kind of set the boundaries of what is acceptable. Maybe.
Well, again, my position is not I'm not saying that this is a truth that everyone must accept. I'm just giving my personal idea of what possibly God is doing with regards to babies that have not been baptized by a human being, that maybe he's sending angels to do it. I don't know that for a fact. I just personally believe that perhaps this is what's happening.
It's a pious and hopeful thought. Actually, that gives me an idea. Give me 1 second, James. Give me 1 second. I would suggest reading this. It might help you a little bit on this because, again, the theoretical thing. It's good to have a pious. It's good to have a pious hope, but also we have to remember the limits of the fathers. Metropolitan Saint Philaret, who died in 1985, wrote something on that. I just put a link there, and I would suggest that this is one of those things where we can hope for the best. Remember, it was St. Gregory of Nyssa who hoped that all things would be restored, even though most of the fathers agree that that was a pious hope, but not realistic. But that's why I suggest read the link I just sent there about whether the heterodox will be saved. But the point is, you have a responsibility to be saved as well. And that's why we would advise you to keep speaking, keep learning about the fathers, and join the Orthodox Catholic Church. Leave all this papal debate with these papal people.
Well, you ought to listen to the debate that Brother Diamond had on the papal office. It's a pretty good debate, and I think he pretty much proved that papal office does exist.
Oh, well, we believe it did exist, but I'm pretty sure that the debate with Brother Diamond and us would go a little bit differently.
Perhaps. We don't know.
A Protestant's not going to concede a whole lot. I mean, a Protestant's going to basically not believe in apostolic succession. They're not going to believe in, any kind of primacy among any patriarchs.
No hierarchy.
They're not going to believe. I mean, you're basically arguing with an anarchist, an ecclesiastical anarchist who doesn't believe in any priesthood. There is no authority in the church, nothing.
Right.
I mean, if you're arguing against that kind of person, I mean, you can prove a whole lot. It's just like, a lot of people would say, well, the Anglican Book of Common Prayer represents the ancient liturgy. Well, it doesn't. But if you compare it to the Baptist church, it probably does in comparison, but it still doesn't. I mean,
the fathers of the West in England,
it's still not there, but I mean, it has the Gloria and Excelsis in it. The Baptists don't even have that. So, I mean, it depends on what you're making a comparison with, I suppose.
Yeah. We want the real meat of the fathers and of the church teachings, the original church teachings in East and West. You got to become Orthodox. And we want to help you.
Now, what do you think about some of the apparitions, like, for example, the apparition of Our Lady of Fatima?
I tend to think that that's definitely not real. It was some sort of, I believe it's demonic, to be honest. And I'll tell you why. In the first place, it talks about the conversion of Russia. Russia was a Christian country. So the point is, the gift of Fatima apparently was the Soviet regime, which killed 23 million people and produced thousands of new martyrs in the church. I don't know that I would say that it was kind of an odd revelation. It kept on appearing.
Well, remember, Fatima was saying that Russia had to be converted to Roman Catholicism. That was what it was trying to argue. So it was so obviously we are Orthodox. We believe we are the church, so we're not going to accept Fatima. When there's no question about that. One couldn't be Orthodox and reasonably accept Fatima unless you believe like the children lied about something, or everybody confused everything. But there's no evidence of that as far as I can tell about all the early stuff. We do have Marian appearances in Orthodoxy. For example,
Our Lady of the Sign.
Yes, Our Lady of the Sign. Who was the saint? And he was the great Russian saint who Our Lady appeared to back in the 14th century. Father Joseph.
I'm thinking.
He was the one that blessed the battle of Kulikovo.
Oh, that I definitely wouldn't know. You would know that one, Father. I mean,
Sergius Radonezh, I believe.
Sergius Radonezh.
Yeah, Our Lady appeared to him. I mean, when we believe Our Lady appeared to Saint Sergius, she actually appeared physically because she has a physical body united with her soul after her death and her resurrection. And such.
Yeah, because she's
so
not
it wasn't just a ghostly, ghostly hologram or anything. She actually, came
she
down.
Still has her body.
Yes.
So the point is, but more importantly, there's the giving of the sash to Saint James. There's there's lots of appearances of the Theotokos, and also through the various icons, the miraculous icons that occur. We've seen that even in our own church. We had a weeping icon in Milan that predated a schism. The Theotokos does speak to us, but I always get concerned when you start hearing this is Our Lady of the Rosary, or this is Our Lady of this or that, and then there's always a secret message that only goes to a seer.
It's like the Simon Stock, the whole stuff associated with Simon Stock.
And the scapular.
Yeah, a lot of it turned out to be stuff that was kind of invented like 20, 30, 40, 100 years earlier. There may have been some original claim of an apparition somebody had, but a lot of stuff about, if you say this many decades or whatever,
out of purgatory and all
every Saturday of some month or something like that. So the concept of the Virgin appearing to people, no, we accept that happens.
But
the question is where is she really appearing? That's the question. For example, I mean, you look at some of the more crazy stuff like Medjugorje, where I know you probably don't accept Medjugorje, James, but you know how insane Medjugorje is. The Virgin saying that Islam is just as good as anything else, or Bayside or something like that.
When I was a convert, when I left Roman Catholicism for Orthodoxy, Medjugorje and Bayside had already been somewhat rejected, but Medjugorje was still a big thing and was causing controversy because a lot of people believed it. And then the so-called seer ended up getting pregnant with one of her guards and stuff like that. It was just craziness. But the point is, you have to test the spirits, and that's why I say that the ways that the Theotokos has appeared to us have never been that weird.
Well, first you'd have to say when the person making the claim of Our Lady appearing, is what she is saying, is it in concord with the true faith? All right, and if it isn't, then it's not real. If it's just like there's in the Desert Fathers, you have a case of supposed the devil appearing as an angel to one of the fathers, I think maybe in St. Anthony.
The one that started eventually just reciting the Old Testament?
Well, no, it was a different one. Anyway, the supposed angel, the supposed angel appeared, maybe it was St. Poman or something like that. And the angel began to praise this man, saying, "Oh, you're destined for heaven, you're one of the elect, and God's going to, all this other stuff." And the father in the 4th century, he made the sign of the cross, and immediately the angel was revealed not to be an angel, to be a demon. All right, because they're terrified of the sign of the cross.
It's a thing they do.
And if you have any appearance where any kind of angel or saint or whoever is supposedly appearing and praising you, saying you're destined for heaven, look how holy you are. If anyone is telling you those things, an angel wouldn't do that because because pride it's going to create pride in you, and you have to endure unto the end. All right, angels don't come with messages of trying to increase your pride or to do anything other than to bring you a message of repentance.
The demons will even try to appear as our Lord and saints, but they will use deceptive methodologies to not admit it. And you have to, there are certain things like asking for a blessing with the sign of the cross, when confronted with one of these things? Can it do that? That happens a lot in the church fathers, and it has often revealed either demons or messages from saints. So the point is, you can't automatically assume that's definitely the Mother of God. Something appeared in the sky. Oh, demons can make stuff appear in the sky, all right.
Now, if you look on YouTube, there's a bunch of videos in around 2009, I think from 2009 to 2012, where there seem to be a lot of appearances of supposedly the Virgin Mary in Egypt at Coptic Orthodox.
I think Zaytun.
Well, Zaytun, I think that was 1968 or 67, right? But I'm talking about in 2009, there was plenty of apparitions. And one of them, for example, they had their phones up. And some of them, I mean, you could see the light that's appearing in it's at night. And they're claiming they saw the Virgin Mary. But some of them that were in the crowd didn't see anything, whereas others did see what appeared to be the Virgin Mary. And you could obviously see the light. You can't make out the Virgin Mary. You can just see this light that's hovering in the air just above the people.
Well, that's the first thing that's kind of suspicious. I mean, the saints and angels identify themselves. That could be anything. I hate to say that, but we believe in
maybe somebody took a projector for all we know, and it gets missed or something like that.
Or the Israelis were testing some.
I'm just saying we don't know. It could have been anything,
Yeah, we have
no
idea.
The Muslims said that. In fact, there was a big debate in Egypt because when the light disappeared, in the background there was a smaller light that went away, and they're saying that somebody was projecting that light there, and they call it Project Bluebeam, where it's some sort of government type operation.
It's not surprising. The point is, and then the problem is that there's always cases of people taking advantage of the credulous. And I'm not going to lie, that has happened in Orthodoxy too. But those things eventually get washed out. Like there's not going to be like some guy with a fraudulent, streaming icon, and somehow that becomes part of the teachings of the church. Usually that's found out, and the fraud's found out, and eventually it just gets thrown away.
Well, remember there was something that happened around like 1715, and there was Archbishop Theophan. There was one of the Russian archbishops in the early 1700s, and people came to him and they said, "Oh, we have this miracle working icon." And after he performed the exorcism, he immediately went behind the icon and kind of opened up the back. All right, and they had kind of put this device, and I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of described in various historical,
like a pump.
Yeah, and they kind of immediately got used to those things to think, well, we need to look for this stuff. Is there someone trying to creating a fraud here so they can make money?
Yep. Or create a following or some sect.
Yeah, just as, for example, you have the church. The church has always been very careful about trying to identify relics. All right, yep. Because people could simply bring relics and say, oh well, here's a relic of a saint, and what evidence do you have? Now, granted, if there's actually a material, a box or reliquary that dates back like year 800 or 700, you're probably not going to have much more documentation than the fact that you can trace the box as being in this church for like 1100 years.
Which is good, that's good. It's a good.
That's pretty good,
Yeah. So the point is, and most of the medieval relics that were being traded, they were often of ridiculous things. There was even
like the three heads of St. John the Baptist, for example,
or the Holy Grail. The point is, like, there's all sorts.
Well, there could the Holy Grail. There's different stuff about that. The Holy Grail is simply supposed to be the chalice. All right, now is it what's in Spain, or who knows? I don't know.
So I mean, the whole point is that there is a lot of controversy over things like that, but the reason there's controversy is because we're not supposed to just take things credulously. We're supposed to test the spirits, and so that's important to do. And I think that when you look at what Fatima was teaching, it doesn't pass muster in Orthodoxy. It's not. It couldn't. It's too bizarre.
Well, what's interesting is if you look in like Saint Augustine, Saint Isidore, and other fathers, they talk about some issues of, for example, when people would approach them that were claiming to be magicians or sorcerers or something like that. That a lot of the fathers, I wrote an article about this from NFTU Father about magic and things like that and how the fathers reacted to it. that in general they were the fathers were incredulous about people claiming to be wizards and able to shoot lightning out of their fingertips. They didn't believe that. With the exception of maybe God allowing a demon to do something. But in general, a lot of them believed a lot of these things being done were simply demonic holograms at best. If they weren't simply I'm getting a lot of feedback from somebody. I don't know where. But,
I'll try to move my mic back.
But anyway, they just didn't accept any of these things automatically. So, okay.
What do you think, James? Thoughts? James?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I'll just go by what, like I said, the Catholic Church goes ahead and says, yeah, I'm getting feedback. But anyway, I'll just go with what the Catholic Church says is a true apparition and whatnot. However, not what the Vatican II text says, because they'll probably go ahead and say Purgatory is true. You're right.
How can you tell the difference?
Purgatory is being true.
I mean,
like I said, I'd go with what the church says.
Now
Vatican II.
So you would apply previous tradition versus what the Vatican II text says, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't go with anything with the Vatican II sect. I don't recognize the Vatican II sect as the church, as the Holy Catholic Church.
Our argument as Western Rite Orthodox Christians is that we wouldn't go with anything the Hildebrandian sect or any of their successors go with after the 11th century.
No, I understand.
Because we believe that the Orthodox Church in the West was basically murdered. It was basically destroyed. The bishops and priests before the 11th century, priests in the West were married.
I'll be right back. Before the
11th century, the concept of papal supremacy didn't exist. All this stuff was introduced by one man who used the power of military force to try to take over and destroy the church, remove bishops by force using military might. And you can see it in Spain, you can see it in Milan. The entire period from the 1020s to 1100 was basically one of upheaval. And the bishops in the West that remained actually deposed Hildebrand and put in Clement III, something we've talked about in many videos. And now the Roman Catholics call him an anti-pope. But at the time, he was the Pope of the West, and he actually tried to reach out to the Orthodox who had been broken up from him by the actions of the Hildebrandites, and he said, look, we need to fix this. But unfortunately, the next pope in the Hildebrandine succession, Urban II, managed to convince the Byzantine emperor that we should have a crusade. And so he told the patriarchs to cut off communion with Clement III. And so what was probably left of orthodoxy in the West died. It was killed off. The rituals, the teachings, all of them killed off and replaced by something else. And this papal supremacy, all of that has its origins with one man, Hildebrand of Savannah. So my suggestion, just like Martin Luther formed the Lutherans, and Bergoglio formed, not Bergoglio, is it? No, it's the John the 23rd formed the Vatican II sect. All these things are separations from the one true Orthodox Catholic Church, and that's why we'd invite you to look at that as opposed to looking at this modern stuff.
Well, now, with regards to stigmatas, do y'all have any priests that have stigmatas on their feet and hands?
That's actually something that there was no record of before the 12th or 13th century.
Okay, so y'all don't have any.
Not all stigmatists are Roman Catholic either. Some of them are pagan.
Oh, I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah, surprise.
Huh.
There's a documentary on stigmatists. You should watch it.
Now, have you ever heard of Padre Pio?
I have. I was a Roman Catholic until I was 21 years old, and I was actually up and coming apologist before God converted me. So trust me, I know this. I went to the Capuchin Cathedral when they were pushing for his canonization.
Now, did you know that there's a person that's still alive today? I think it's a male, and he doesn't have any pupils in his eyes to this day, and yet he's able to see because Padre Pio went ahead and cured him of his blindness. And scientists, they say that it's impossible for that individual to have sight. They don't understand how it is.
He can see, but he can't. He doesn't have pupils.
Correct. He does not. Right. He doesn't. Yeah,
I've
he
never
doesn't
heard
have.
of a
Well,
healing where the person isn't healed.
yeah, but that's what I'm telling you is he doesn't have the. I don't. Maybe you could see like the little blackness in the center of the eye, but that which is supposed to be inside of the eyeball, whereby it actually takes in the light and makes sense of it. He didn't have that, and he still doesn't have that, and yet he's able to see. And scientists don't understand how it is he's able to see because it was
That sounds
when
really weird.
blindness that he became able to see.
You wouldn't know the origin of my suspicion there, but the point is, when people are healed,
now there's an article about this, and it says it's a blind girl with no pupils.
Okay,
that was cured by Padre Pio. That's I don't know. Are you saying there's another one of a man or?
No, it must be a female. Then I thought it was male.
I mean,
but
it's not a big deal.
Well, he's saying that she doesn't have pupils. That would mean she still can't see.
Let me see. There's a video of her.
If that's the case, then there's something else is going on here, and I don't necessarily know that that's necessarily a good thing. Because when Christ heals, and when the saints heals, and when we read about healings, even recent healings, the person's just healed. They just go there. That gets healed. This is a person who's not healed, but somehow can see. That doesn't make sense.
Her name is Gemma Di Giorgio, and you see the photos. I'm trying to see it. She's always kind of wearing sunglasses. So that's okay. Hold on. All right. So let me see if it's okay. Well, it's something to look into. But again, it would no more to me. The concept of someone doing a miracle would no more. Supposed miracle would no more prove something than if I were to say, "Well, look at Orthodox." St. John Maximovich cured somebody or raised somebody from the dead. You'd say, well, I don't believe that. That can't happen, So I wouldn't necessarily say it would prove anything.
It sounds like to me, it sounds weird.
Again, I don't know. I haven't looked at it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm suspicious of it, to say the least. But in any case, yeah, we don't know. Certainly, God can provide healing, to where he sees fit, but I don't, that doesn't necessarily mean that the person's in the church. So that's where I would go with that.
Now, there's a condition called aniridia, which is an eye disorder characterized by complete or partial absence of the color part of the eye, but one does not still have total blindness. It looks like one doesn't have. It looks just like one has the white with kind of a black around it. A black with center.
So in other words, it's theoretically possible that her eyes are sufficiently able to see.
Yes, it's called aniridia. So
okay, all right. Well, that answers that.
So again, that's that you could always posit that. So.
Yeah, the point is we're naturally suspicious of even people in the Orthodox Church claiming it. So of course we're going to be suspicious of people outside the Orthodox Church claiming it. Make sense?
Because you don't just accept whatever someone says immediately. There could always be something.
You have to test it. You got to test it.
Now, what's your thoughts on the Shroud of Turin?
I think it's real.
I believe it's real.
Yeah.
I believe what happened is that it was kept in Constantinople. And when the Fourth Crusade happened, the Crusaders basically sacked most of the churches.
And they took it.
They took everything they could find. I even believe that there's an object in Spain called the face cloth of Oviedo. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's actually the face cloth, because there was this big event that happened, I think, in the 900s in Constantinople, or maybe it was the late 800s, in which there was this, holy face cloth that was brought to Constantinople, if I recall correctly. And I think they've even done comparisons between the face cloth of Oviedo and the markings on the Shroud of Turin, and they kind of match up. Everything kind of matches up. So
I think they also call that face cloth, the Sidarium cloth.
Sidarium, exactly.
Sidarium, yeah. Mm-hmm.
They went ahead and they matched up the blood stain on that cloth, the upper part of the Shroud of Turin, and they did find that the blood stains match up perfectly.
Well, that just goes to show you that even with modern technology that we're able to do that basically we're able to see that the tradition of the church in that period was correct. We don't need to modify it or change it.
Now it's interesting because you have in all these old Paschal responsories in the Roman Rite that go back probably to the 8th century or earlier. You have there was one of the pastoral responsories is like, our king battling the prince of death upon the cross, despoiled the fiercely armored foe, rising soon in glory, he left the sudarium to those that suffer on earth, returning victorious to his father's throne, he hath brought back the prize, hallelujah. So I mean, everybody kind of knew about this. And was something else I was reading about this. There's another question about whether there are in fact additional cloths. For example, the Mandelion, and there's images of, for example, the Byzantine emperor John Skylitzes in the 11th century venerating the Mandelion. Of course, there's the account that the Mandelion was our Lord.
I thought it was a shroud folded over.
Well, no. Remember, there's all kinds of discussion about this. Whether there's actually, there's some people who believe, in fact, we're talking about multiple. We're talking about one's a shroud, one's in fact the face cloth, and another's in fact the cloth that Christ pressed on his face that he sent to the king in Edessa. There's all kinds of early traditions and different fathers about these subjects. So now there was something I wrote about this some time ago. For example, now a separate face sudarium has been venerated for a long time, and of course, even the two different traditions we find around the Mandelion are incompatible with the Mandelion being the sudarium. For example, whether one agrees with the view that the Mandelion is an image impressed by the Lord's sweat, goes the route of what Gregory Referendarius, who was the Archdeacon in Constantinople in the 10th century, said, or what the Emperor Constantine Porphyrogenitus said in the 10th century. That is, it may have been produced in the garden during the Lord's agony in order to explain the clear blood marks that Gregory describes on the martyrdom upon his personal examination. So, there could be multiple different cloths. I see no reason why that's not possible.
There's another thing that I want to mention, because I realize that James is asking about miracles that are not only venerated by us Orthodox, but venerated, by the Roman Catholics. If you take like Saint Januarius, or you take like the Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano, those things happened in the Orthodox period of the West. We believe those things. So,
yeah, in Lanciano was the result of a Greek priest who had fled Constantinople because of the iconoclast emperors, and they received, protection in Italy. And when the Greek priest was celebrating the Eastern liturgy, he was supposedly an educated man of some sort, and he kind of began to doubt, how could this really be the body and the blood? How was this
and that's
possible?
how it transformed into the body.
Because a lot of times these manifestations are either cases of extreme piety, God giving a manifestation of something to reward somebody of sorts for piety. That happened like with Saint Oda Saint Oda, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury in the 10th century, who was, I think, the uncle of Saint Oswald. Or there are cases of unbelief and the Lord manifesting a miracle for that reason. As such. So,
that might. I was thinking about the miracle of Lanciano when you were talking about the Eucharist with Matt Slett.
Yeah, I was going to bring it up.
Yeah, that if you continued your discussion with them on that would be good to bring up, because it's scientists have actually looked at it and analyzed it, and they found that it's actual living flesh. It does not die.
No, I'm aware of that. Now, here's the interesting thing with Matt Slick. Ultimately, what it comes down to is he succumbed to a different form of the same rationalism that we find in Roman Catholicism. And that's why he got so confused by the handkerchiefs, because the handkerchiefs literally taught the manifestation of God in the handkerchiefs being able to heal people after being touched by St. Paul is a demonstration that God's power can move in any object he wants. This is something that doesn't make sense, because to Matt Slick, God is a God of logic. And unfortunately, that's scholasticism. Our God isn't a God of logic. He's beyond our descriptions. We tend to think of the omnis. He's beyond the omnis. He's outside of any concept of reality that we can think of in his essence. And his energies permeate the earth. And that's why I say to you, you want to experience that, so you need the true Eucharist. You got to become Orthodox.
Is it my understanding that Matt Slick doesn't believe physical matter is capable of conveying?
That's correct.
God's grace?
He actually said the only case where that could be the case was the incarnation.
So why does he make an exception for the incarnation, but not for everything else?
Because that's my point.
What about the Ark? What about the Ark of the Covenant?
I think he would. I don't even know what he'd say on that. That would be fun to ask him, but I wanted to bring up other theophanies and things like that, and I want to see how he's going to react. We'll see. That's on Thursday. But in any case, do you have any more? You have any more questions for us, James?
And no, but another thing you could bring up if you talk to him again is like, for example, Jesus actually used material things when he would heal people. Like, for example,
I brought up the
mud.
sand. Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay. And spitting on the mud and putting it on the man's eyes and
Right.
curing him.
That's when he admitted that water has to be used, and when that water is necessity with faith. And he said many Protestants disagree with me. So,
and also, what about the issue of the Epistle of James, where he says, "Call for the presbyters or the priests of the church," and then the
I was going to get to that, because that's one of the things I want to talk to him about, is about the reality of all the aspects of Christian life. The biggest one being the Eucharist, which was still difficult for him. But the point is, we got to talk about we covered, I mentioned anointing with oil, so on, and he said, well, we do that. Okay, so then that's out of the way. But you still need to get it from the church, which he's not part of. And so
what does he believe about it? Because remember, James says
probably just get some oil from somewhere, and they're.
Well, my point is that St. James says that there's remission of sins in that anointing. So it's not just some memorial observance.
I don't think that's my point. This is the stuff that, because the faith isn't living once you're in a rationalistic mode, some of that stuff is lost on people.
Okay.
Right.
I'm finished.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, we went over time a lot. Sorry about that. It's normally an hour, James. We probably won't do one tomorrow because of that, but I will be on the Matt Slick thing, God willing. If I'm not dead, or of a heart attack or anything like that,
well, don't die.
I'll do my best. But in any case, it's all up to God. To everyone listening, thank you so much. Everyone commenting, thank you so much again, and have a good night.
Benedicite.
Benedicite.
Oh, hold on,
Okay.
guys, before you go, I've heard y'all say that before. What does that mean?
Oh, it's just it's bless. It's the accusative forward, the forward accusative of bless. In other words, bless me, like
bless ye. It means bless ye.
Bless ye. So like give a blessing.
Benedicite.
It's like in Greek they say eulogite, and in Russian they say blagoslovite, but in Latin it would be benedicite.
Well, for example,
okay.
Monks, when they're having dinner or before they have dinner, they say benedicite, benedicite.
Among many Hispanic Catholics, you'll see a parent bless their child before they leave the house. That actually is an Orthodox custom, and it comes from the parent having the right to bless children.
It's also, for example, like in monasteries, a lot of times when somebody knocks on your door, they'll say, "Glory to Jesus Christ," and the response is like, "Glory forever," for example.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, well, everyone have a good night. Father Benedicite. Thank you for being on, James. And
have a good night. It was nice talking to you.
You can come on anytime.
Okay. Good night. Good night, James.